It was almost midnight when the sleek black limousine came to a slow stop in front of our driveway. The only sound in the quiet night was the hum of its powerful engine, vibrating softly in the stillness. I stayed hidden in the shadows of the porch, the dim glow from my phone screen lighting up the damning evidence I had just uncovered. Photos, clear as day, of my wife, Diana, walking arm in arm with none other than Donald Trump. These weren't the kind of pictures you'd expect from a public event or a casual photo op. No, these were personal. Intimate. They were taken in private settings, behind closed doors. I stared at them again, trying to process what I was seeing. Her laugh, her smile, it was all there. The woman I'd been married to for 40 years looked like a stranger, glowing in a world I didn't belong to. The car door clicked open, and she stepped out, her heels tapping softly against the stone path leading to the house. She wore a sleek evening dress I hadn't seen before, shimmering faintly under the moonlight. A small clutch purse dangled from her hand, and there was a look on her face, one of calm confidence, like nothing in the world could touch her. Watching her approach, I felt my jaw tighten. As she reached the door, I stepped forward, out of the shadows. The sudden movement caught her off guard, and she froze. "You late," I said. My tone was measured, almost quiet, but there was no mistaking the edge in my voice. "Jack," she said, her voice steady, but I could see the flicker of surprise in her eyes. "What are you doing out here?" Instead of answering, I held up the phone, the screen still showing the photos. "Care to explain this?" Her gaze shifted to the screen, and for a brief moment, I saw her composure crack. Just a second. But then, just like that, the mask was back. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. I stepped closer, lowering the phone but keeping my eyes locked on hers. "Then why don't you tell me what it is, Diana?" She hesitated, her lips parting as if to answer, but no words came out. Her eyes darted away from mine, and she turned slightly, as though trying to shield herself from my presence. "Look," she said finally, her tone softening, "this isn't something you can understand. It's complicated." I tilted my head, my voice dropping lower. "Try me." For a moment, she just stood there, the confidence she carried minutes ago fading. She opened her mouth again, but no explanation came. Instead, she shook her head and stepped past me toward the door. "Diana," I called after her, my voice sharp enough to make her stop. "Who is he?" She turned halfway, her expression unreadable. "You don't want to do this right now," she said, almost pleading. But I wasn't going to let it go. Not this time. "Who is he?" I repeated, emphasizing each word. She stared at me, her shoulders stiffening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she said one name. A single word that sent a chill through me. "Donald." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "Donald?" I repeated, my voice heavy with disbelief. "Donald Trump," she said, her voice steady now, almost defiant. In that moment, the world I thought I knew crumbled around me. The next morning, Diana was gone before I woke up. The sound of her car pulling out of the driveway stirred me just enough to look at the clock, at 6:15 a.m. She never left this early. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Her words from the night before echoed in my mind, cold and sharp. Donald Trump. I spent the next hour scrolling through the photos again, analyzing every detail. Her smile. The way she leaned into him, her hand resting on his arm. The man I'd seen plastered across every news channel for years now stood in the center of my world, threatening to destroy everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not without answers. By the time Diana returned home around noon, I had already made my first move. I'd reached out to a private investigator I'd worked with decades ago during my time in the military. He wasn't cheap, but he was discreet. The kind of man who could dig up dirt on a ghost if you gave him enough time. When she walked in, I was waiting in the kitchen, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. "Busy morning?" I asked casually, not looking up. She hesitated, just for a moment. "Charity meeting," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "Charity?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You didn't mention it last night." "It came up suddenly," she replied, her tone clipped. "You know how these things are." I set my mug down, leaning forward slightly. "I thought charity meetings didn't involve secret dinners with the former president." Her head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing. "Are we really doing this again, Jack?" I stood up, towering over her. "Damn right we are. You don't just get to drop a bomb like that and walk away, Diana. Not this time." Her calm facade cracked, and I saw something in her eyes, panic. "It's not what you think," she started, but I cut her off. "Stop saying that," I growled. "You're not walking out of this conversation until I get the truth." For a moment, she just stared at me, as if calculating her next move. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Jack, this is bigger than you and me. You wouldn't understand." I slammed my hand on the counter, the sound echoing through the kitchen. "Then make me understand." She flinched but didn't speak. The silence between us grew heavier until she finally said, "I was helping him with personal matters." "That's all." "Personal matters?" I laughed bitterly. "That's a cute way of describing affairs. How long has this been going on, Diana? Weeks? Months? Years?" She didn't answer. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. I took a step closer, my voice low but steady. "You have no idea what you've done, do you? You've been playing with fire, and now it's time to burn." For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. By the next evening, the calm I'd clung to for 24 hours was gone. My mind was racing, and every rational thought was drowned out by a singular truth: Diana wasn't just lying to me. She was using me. 40 years of marriage, reduced to a charade while she played whatever twisted game this was with Donald Trump. But if she thought I was going to sit back and let her humiliate me, she was dead wrong. Around 8 p.m., Diana came home, her expression carefully neutral. No greeting, no explanation. She headed straight upstairs, as if the last 24 hours hadn't happened. I gave her 5 minutes before following her. She was in the bedroom, rummaging through her closet. When she saw me standing in the doorway, she froze for just a second before forcing a casual smile. "Do you need something, Jack?" "I know you're meeting him again tonight," I said bluntly, not bothering to play dumb anymore. Her hand hovered over a dress hanger, but she didn't turn around. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice tight. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, stepping into the room. "I saw the messages on your tablet. I know where you're going." She spun around, her eyes flashing with anger. "You went through my things?" I crossed my arms, unfazed by her attempt to deflect. "You gave me no choice." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. Instead, she walked past me toward the door. "I'm not doing this with you, Jack." I grabbed her wrist before she could leave, not hard enough to hurt but enough to stop her. "Oh, you're not leaving this house until we finish this conversation," I said coldly. She yanked her arm away, glaring at me. "You're acting like a lunatic." "This is exactly why." "Why what?" I interrupted, stepping closer. "Why you've been sneaking around behind my back? Why you think it's okay to disrespect me in this marriage?" "Because you've made it impossible to talk to you," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You're so obsessed with control that you can't even see." "I see just fine," I said, cutting her off again. "I see a woman who sold out her husband for a taste of power. I see someone who has no idea what loyalty means." Her face twisted in frustration, but I wasn't finished. and I see a man who's finally had enough. So, Diana, here's how this is going to work. You're going to tell me everything, every detail, every lie, every time you left this house to meet him. Or I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are and what you've been doing. Her eyes widened slightly, the first real crack in her armor. You wouldn't dare, she whispered. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice to a near growl. Try me. She stared at me, breathing hard, but she didn't say a word. That was all the confirmation I needed. Pack your things, I said, stepping back. Because if you walk out that door tonight, you're not coming back. I didn't sleep that night. The house was silent, but my mind was anything but. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past few days. Diana was in the guest room, probably thinking I'd calm down or let this slide. She was wrong. By sunrise, I had a plan. If she thought she could walk all over me, I'd show her just how wrong she was. 40 years of loyalty, love, and sacrifice weren't going to end with me as the fool. She wanted power? She wanted games? Fine. I was about to show her what real control looked like. First, I called the private investigator. I want everything you can find on her and him. I don't care how far you have to dig. Bank accounts, phone records, where they meet, how often. If they breathed in the same room, I want to know about it, I said. The investigator, a gruff man named Callahan, chuckled. You got it. This won't be cheap. I don't care about the cost, I said. I want results. By noon, Callahan had already sent me the first batch of evidence. Diana had been meeting Trump at a private estate just outside Palm Beach. Photos of them walking together, talking close, her hand lingering on his arm like they were teenagers sneaking around. But that wasn't the worst part. The estate was registered under a shell company, likely to keep their meetings off the radar. The secrecy only confirmed what I already knew: this wasn't just an affair. It was calculated, planned, deliberate. I stared at the photos, my anger boiling over. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment mistake. This was betrayal at the highest level. That evening, Diana tried to act like nothing was wrong. She came into the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine, and asked, "What's for dinner?" like we were a normal couple. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Dinner?" I said, my voice cold. "You've got some nerve, asking me about dinner when you've been sneaking around with him." Her hand froze mid-pour. "Jack, we've talked about this," she said, her tone dripping with fake patience. "We haven't talked about anything," I snapped, slamming the stack of photos onto the counter. "But we're going to talk about this." Her eyes widened when she saw the photos. For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. "Where did you get these?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that I know everything. So don't even think about lying to me again." She took a step back, clutching the counter like it might save her. "Jack, it's not what it looks like." "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Don't insult my intelligence. This is exactly what it looks like." She stared at me, her face pale. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she whispered. "But it did," I said, my voice like ice. "And now you're going to tell me everything, or I swear, Diana, you'll regret it." For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She knew I wasn't bluffing. The next morning, Diana wasn't in the house. Her car was gone, and she'd left no note, no text, nothing. I wasn't surprised. She was running, trying to regain control of a situation that was already slipping through her fingers. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't waiting for her to come back. The game had already changed, and I was about to make my first move. I called Callahan, the investigator. "Did you get into her financials yet?" "Just got access to her secondary account," he said. "You going to want to see this." By noon, I had the full report. Diana had been siphoning money from our joint account into a separate one for months. Thousands of dollars, money she claimed was for household expenses or charity donations, was being spent on luxury gifts, five-star hotels, and private car services. She'd even transferred $25,000 to a consulting firm linked to Trump's inner circle. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was funding it. That was my breaking point. I drove straight to the bank. Within an hour, I'd frozen every joint account, cancelled her credit cards, and moved the remaining funds into an account solely in my name. I wasn't about to let her spend another cent of my money on her secret life. By the time Diana got home that evening, I was waiting for her in the living room. The stack of financial records sat on the coffee table, next to the damning photos. She walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, carrying an expensive shopping bag. When she saw me, her confident smile faltered. "We need to talk," I said, my tone calm but unrelenting. She hesitated, then set the bag down. "Jack, I've had a long day." "Sit," I ordered, pointing to the couch. Her eyes narrowed, but she obeyed. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I know about the money, Diana. The transfers, the hotels, the gifts. I know everything." Her face went pale. "I can explain?" "You don't need to," I said, cutting her off. "I already froze the accounts." "Your cards?" "Cancelled. Every dollar you thought you had access to? Gone." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked genuinely panicked. "You've been lying to me for months," I continued, my voice low but sharp. "And now, you're going to feel what it's like to lose everything. Every dime. Every ounce of comfort. It's over, Diana. You can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Legally." "Legally?" I laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Legally, you don't have a leg to stand on. I've got enough evidence to bury you in court." She stood abruptly, her fists clenched. "You think you can control me? Humiliate me like this? You'll regret it, Jack." I stood too, towering over her. "The only one regretting anything is you. Now, get out of my sight." For the first time, she didn't have a snarky comeback. She grabbed her bag and stormed upstairs, slamming the door behind her. I didn't care. The wheels were already in motion, and there was no stopping them now. The morning after our confrontation, Diana was gone again. No explanation, no goodbye. Just the sound of her car peeling out of the driveway as I sipped my coffee, staring at the stack of evidence that now felt heavier than ever. But this time, I wasn't just waiting for her next move. I had one of my own, and it was going to hit her where it hurt the most. I made a call to an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Mike was a retired federal investigator, the kind of guy who knew how to dig into secrets and expose them to the world. "Mike," I said when he picked up. "I've got a situation. And I need it to be loud." By lunchtime, I had Mike in my living room, flipping through the photos and financial records. He let out a low whistle. "This is a hell of a mess you've got here, Jack. But if you want to play hardball, we're going to need more." "What do you mean more?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. He leaned back, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We need a smoking gun. Something so undeniable that it destroys both of them, her and her golden boy." That's when I remembered the estate. The private property where they'd been meeting in secret. Callahan had mentioned it, but I hadn't thought much of it until now. If they were hiding something, it had to be there. "Then let's go find it," I said. That evening, Mike and I drove out to the estate. It was secluded, surrounded by tall gates and dense trees, but nothing a couple of determined men couldn't handle. With a pair of binoculars and some patience, we waited. Around 9 p.m., a convoy of black SUVs pulled up. And there she was, Diana, stepping out of the lead car, dressed like she was walking the red carpet. A few moments later, another figure emerged, flanked by security. Trump. Got em, Mike muttered, snapping photos with a high-powered camera. But it wasn't enough. I needed more than just pictures of them arriving together. We waited for hours, the cold night air biting at my skin, until finally, the lights inside the main house went dark. What now? Mike asked, lowering the camera. Now, I said, pulling a small recording device from my pocket, we get inside. We scaled the gate under the cover of darkness, moving quietly toward the house. Mike worked the lock on a side door with practiced precision, and within minutes, we were inside. The place was as extravagant as I'd expected: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, walls lined with expensive art. But we weren't here to admire the decor. We made our way upstairs, following the faint sound of voices. And then we found it, the office. The door was ajar, and inside, Diana and Trump were deep in conversation. I couldn't make out every word, but what I did hear was enough to confirm my worst suspicions. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning something. Transfer the funds quietly, Trump was saying. We can't afford any loose ends. Diana nodded, her voice low. I'll handle it. He won't suspect a thing. I felt a surge of anger so intense, it took everything in me not to kick the door down right then and there. Mike grabbed my arm, shaking his head. Not yet, he whispered. We backed away slowly, recording everything. By the time we made it back to the car, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I had what I needed now. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was bigger. Much bigger. I didn't waste time. By the next morning, I had the audio recording and photos from the estate in my hands. Listening to Diana and Trump discuss shady financial transfers made my blood boil all over again. This wasn't just betrayal, it was corruption on a scale I hadn't even considered. If they thought they could keep this buried, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I sent the recording and photos to Mike. Make sure these land in the right hands, I told him. I don't care who you have to call, reporters, lawyers, hell, even the FBI. Just make it big. Mike grinned, his usual calm replaced with something sharper. Oh, don't worry. By the time I'm done, this will be the only thing anyone's talking about. While Mike got to work, I focused on the next part of my plan, hitting Diana where it hurt the most. She thought she could lie, cheat, and walk away with her head held high. Not on my watch. First, I called her closest friends. People she'd spent years charming, lying to, and manipulating. I sent each of them an anonymous message with a few carefully chosen photos and a simple line: I asked her about this. Next, I called her family. I didn't give them all the details, just enough to plant the seeds of doubt. You might want to ask Diana why she's been spending so much time out of town, I said, my voice deliberately casual. Within hours, my phone started blowing up. Her friends and family were calling, texting, demanding answers. I ignored them all. Let her deal with the fallout. By noon, the first article went live. The headline was bold and unmissable: a former president tied to secret scandal, a private estate meetings revealed. The photo of Diana and Trump stepping out of the limousine was front and center. It spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up, dissecting every detail. Talk shows speculated endlessly. Social media exploded with memes and conspiracy theories. By the end of the day, Diana's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. When she came home that evening, her face was pale, her hands trembling. She slammed the door behind her and marched into the living room, where I sat calmly, sipping a beer. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of rage and fear. I didn't even look up. What I should have done a long time ago, I said, setting my beer down. "You're destroying my life," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Your life?" I stood, my voice finally rising. "You destroyed our life, Diana. You lied to me. You stole from me. And now you're paying the price." She took a shaky step back, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand, this will ruin everything. For both of us." "No, Diana," I said coldly. "It'll ruin you. I'm already free." Before she could say another word, my phone buzzed. It was Mike. "Turn on the news," he said. I grabbed the remote and flipped to a major network. There it was, breaking news. The scandal had reached Washington. Congress was calling for an investigation, and reporters were camping outside Trump's offices. Diana sank onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. For the first time, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. She had wanted power, control, excitement. Now, she had it. Just not the way she'd imagined. When the sun rose the next morning, the world was already ablaze with the fallout from the scandal. News anchors dissected every frame of the leaked photos and recordings. Analysts speculated about the financial transfers and their implications. Social media erupted into chaos, with hashtags like #DianaExposed and #TrumpScandal trending worldwide. But for Diana, the storm was only just beginning. By mid-morning, she was pacing the living room like a caged animal, her phone glued to her ear. Every call she made ended the same way, with her face growing paler and her voice more desperate. "You don't understand," she hissed into the phone. "This is all being blown out of proportion." I stood in the doorway, watching her unravel. "They're not buying it, are they?" I said, my voice calm, almost amused. She spun around, her face a mask of fury. "You did this, Jack. You destroyed everything." I stepped into the room, crossing my arms. "No, Diana. You did this. I just made sure the truth came out." Her phone buzzed again, and she snatched it up, but this time, her hand shook as she read the screen. "It's from the board," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I raised an eyebrow. "The charity board?" She nodded, her face crumpling. "They're demanding my resignation. They think I've tarnished the organization's reputation." I couldn't help but laugh. "You mean the reputation you were using as a cover for your little escapades?" "Yeah, that sounds about right." Her phone buzzed again, and this time, she threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud, the screen shattering. "You don't understand, Jack. This isn't just about me. This could ruin him, too." I took a step closer, my eyes narrowing. "That's the point, Diana. He thought he could get away with using you like a pawn. You both thought I was too blind, too weak to fight back. But now, the whole world sees you for who you really are." She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "They're going to come after me," she whispered. "His people, they'll ruin me." I leaned down, my voice icy. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you got into bed with him." Literally. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mike. "Check your email. You're gonna want to see this." I opened the email, and my jaw tightened as I read the subject line, "A direct response from Trump's team." Attached was a statement they were planning to release, denying everything and throwing Diana under the bus. According to them, she was an unstable individual who had fabricated the entire relationship for attention. I turned the phone around and held it in front of her. "Congratulations, Diana. He's already cutting you loose." Her eyes widened as she read the statement, and tears streamed down her face. "No. No, he wouldn't." "But he did," I said, my voice cold. "You were nothing to him. Just another liability he could discard when it became inconvenient." She shook her head, sobbing, but I had no sympathy left. I warned you, Diana. I told you there would be consequences. And now, you're facing them. The storm had only grown stronger by the time the next day rolled around. News networks were now running 24/7 coverage of the scandal, dissecting every word, photo, and recording. Reporters camped outside Trump's offices, demanding answers, while pundits speculated on how this would affect his legacy. Meanwhile, Diana had become the face of betrayal. Memes flooded social media, hashtags like #CheatingCharityQueen and #TrumpMistress skyrocketed in popularity, and her name was splashed across every headline. But for me, it still wasn't enough. She destroyed 40 years of my life, and I wasn't about to stop until she had nothing left. That morning, I called Mike. "What else do you have on her?" I asked, pacing the kitchen. He chuckled darkly. "Oh, I've got plenty. Turns out, your wife wasn't just spending money on herself. She funneled over $50,000 into offshore accounts. Want me to leak it?" I gripped the edge of the counter, considering the move. "No," I said finally. "Not yet. I have a better idea." The idea came to life that afternoon. I arranged for a private meeting with Diana's charity board. These were the same people who had idolized her, who had supported her initiatives for years. They had no idea the depths of her deception. When I walked into their conference room, carrying a neatly organized folder of documents, all eyes turned to me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady. "I'm here to shed some light on the person you've trusted with your organization." I laid out everything, bank statements showing her misuse of funds, photos of her extravagant trips, and, of course, the audio recording of her and Trump discussing secret financial transfers. The room fell silent, the board members exchanging horrified glances. "Are you saying she was using the charity to cover her tracks?" one of them asked, his voice shaking. "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied. "And if you don't act now, this scandal will bury not just her, but all of you." Within the hour, the board released an official statement, condemning Diana's actions and cutting all ties with her. The media ate it up, branding her a con artist and a fraud. When Diana came home that evening, she was a shell of the woman I once knew. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled, and her eyes red from crying. She stumbled into the living room, clutching a crumpled letter in her hand. "They fired me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The board, they said I'm done." I leaned back in my chair, watching her crumble. "Good," I said, my tone devoid of sympathy. "Now you know how it feels to lose everything." She dropped into the chair across from me, shaking her head. "You don't understand, Jack. They're going to come after me. Legally. Financially. I'll have nothing left." "That's the point, Diana," I said coldly. "You destroyed this family. You destroyed me. Now, you get to live with the consequences." Her phone buzzed on the table, but she didn't reach for it. I glanced at the screen and saw the name Donald flash across it. "Go ahead," I said, smirking. "Answer it. See if he's still there to save you." She didn't move. For the first time, she looked truly broken, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "What have I done?" I stood, towering over her. "What you've done," I said, my voice sharp as a blade, "is lose everything that mattered. And now, Diana, you'll have to live with it." The day of reckoning had arrived. By the time the morning news hit the airwaves, Diana's name was the top headline in every outlet across the country. Clips of her downfall played on repeat, her financial fraud exposed, her affair with Trump dissected by every pundit, and the charity's official statement branding her as a liability. But there was one final move I had been saving, my grand finale. I spent the day making arrangements. Calls were made, emails sent, and by the evening, everything was in place. When Diana returned home that night, she looked like she had aged 10 years in a matter of days. Her once pristine appearance was gone, replaced by the broken, disheveled image of a woman who had lost everything. "Jack," she started, her voice weak and hoarse. "I don't know how to fix this. Please, just tell me what to do." I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it felt unbearable. "Fix it?" I said finally, my tone sharp. "You think this is something you can fix with an apology? You not sorry, Diana. You just sorry you got caught." She flinched, but I wasn't finished. 40 years, I said, my voice rising. I gave you 40 years of my life. Loyalty, love, trust. And you threw it all away for what? Some thrill? A taste of power? You didn't just betray me, you betrayed everything we built together. Her tears started again, but this time I didn't care. She deserved every ounce of pain she was feeling. "There's nothing left to say," I continued, my voice ice cold. "You wanted a different life? Congratulations. Now you have it. Alone." Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. Her head snapped up, confusion flashing across her face. Who is that?" she stammered. I smirked. "Why don't you open it and find out?" She hesitated, but eventually got up and opened the door. Standing there were two men in suits, holding folders with official-looking seals. "Mrs. Hamilton," one of them said. "We're here on behalf of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have questions about your involvement in certain financial transactions." Her face turned ghostly white. "FBI," she whispered, her voice trembling. What is this about?" The second agent spoke up. "We've received evidence linking you to several offshore accounts tied to illegal financial activity. We'll need you to come with us for questioning." She turned to me, panic flooding her eyes. "Jack. You did this?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her squirm. "I warned you, Diana," I said calmly. "You thought you could lie, cheat, and steal your way through life without consequences. Well, here they are." The agent stepped aside, waiting for her to follow. She looked at me one last time, her face a mixture of anger, fear, and despair. "You'll regret this, Jack," she hissed. I shook my head. "No, Diana. You'll regret ever thinking I was weak." The agents led her to their car, and as the door closed behind her, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. She was gone. For good this time. Later that evening, I sat on the porch, the quiet of the night wrapping around me like a blanket. For the first time in months, the chaos was gone. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was free. As I sipped my drink, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mike. "You did it, Jack. She's finished. Cheers to a new chapter." I smiled, setting the phone down. A new chapter, indeed.